All right, guys, you ready to go?
Mhm.
All right, so here we go. So five, four, three, two, and one. All right, folks, welcome back to the podcast. I am very excited to have my guests, Holly and Dylan Crumpler. Folks, welcome.
Thank you. We're
Thank
glad
you.
to be here. Thanks for having
Awesome.
us.
So Holly and Dylan are a mother and son team of enthusiastic advocates working to reduce the stigma associated with dissociative identity disorder. Given that DID has historically been depicted in a very inaccurate, sensationalized, and negative way in film and TV, Dylan envisioned and created his senior thesis film titled Petals of a Rose at Chapman University to realistically depict the day in the life of a woman with DID. He co-wrote the screenplay with his mother, Holly, who was diagnosed with DID in 2018 at the age of 51. Petals of a Rose has received international acclaim, and Dylan and Holly have gone on to share the film at numerous mental health conferences and educational events. The film is being used by clinicians in training sessions, college courses, and therapeutic sessions. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you, Guy.
You're welcome. So before we get going here, share with our listeners where you're from originally and where you are currently.
I'm originally from St. Louis, Missouri, but now live in Raleigh, North Carolina, where I've been for the last 46 years.
Okay. And Dylan, obviously you're from the same place.
Yeah, I'm from Raleigh, North Carolina, and I'm still in Raleigh, North Carolina.
Mhm.
I've moved
Okay.
around, to Chapman Universities in California, but I'm back here due to all those strikes, and
Okay.
California's expensive.
Yeah. Awesome. So, um, let's get it. How did all this start? I think that's a very interesting question to begin with.
Yeah. How did all this start? So just quick summary of my life story in a couple minutes is I was a tax partner at Deloitte where I worked for 25 years until 2012 when I became extremely ill physically and had to take a disability retirement from my career of 25 years. And after several years of trying to figure out what was going on with my physical health and getting it a little bit more under control, because I had chronic Lyme disease, I had mold poisoning, all kinds of issues that basically put me in bed for like 18 hours a day. And we had a hard time finding answers. But once we did and got things a little more stable with my health, I went into a period of time where I could focus a little bit more on what was going on in my head. And was able to start doing some work on my childhood traumas that I had never really processed or dealt with while I was just busy working. And as I did that work, eventually I got to a point in the end of 2017, beginning of 2018, where things got a little bit, I'll just say, uh, disturbing. It was a very difficult time. We call it the Great Unravelling, and we didn't really know what was going on other than we were having a lot of very scary thoughts and nightmares and flashbacks and things related to our childhood, but also other things that didn't make sense to us. And we luckily made our way to a psychiatrist who was able to diagnose us with dissociative identity disorder in March of 2018 at the
Now,
age of
I
50.
notice you're using us and we were diagnosed and
Yes. Yeah, for people who have DID, it's very common to alternate between I and we pronouns because we are a system of 26 people living in our body. So when I say we, I'm not talking about Dylan and me sitting here. I'm talking about all the parts
yeah.
within our system.
Okay. Thank you for that clarification.
Mhm.
So when you started experiencing those physical symptoms, did you find that they were later directly related to what was going on with everything?
I don't think they're directly related. I think it's not uncommon for people who have suffered with childhood trauma to have significant chronic health issues, and in particular impacts to their immune system, which is what my primary issues are surrounding. And there's still issues for me. I still have to manage my health very carefully. So, figuring out what was happening with getting the diagnosis of DID was not directly correlated, but our body was crying out for help for a very long time.
Right. So in the bio, it said that you were diagnosed in 2018 at the age
Mhm.
of 51.
Correct.
Were you experiencing symptoms prior to that?
The physical symptoms of
Well,
so
symptoms of DID.
Yeah. So DID is a tricky thing because it's a very covert condition by its very nature. That the identities are created to encapsulate traumas that are not to be shared with the rest of the self, so that the other selves can go to school, go to work, do your job, and not have to think about the things that happened. So because of that, it's very covert, and people can go through their life like I did for 51 years without people really knowing, oh, I have these different identities. I used to just think that I was kind of moody, or I'd have these different, mood states and I think my husband and Dylan can talk about his own experience, but never really, put that together because I didn't really know anything about the condition. And just really thought I was just kind of moody or erratic and stressed out from working a very, very big career with two children and lots of things going on in my life. So I wasn't really slowing down enough ever to listen to what was going on in my head. And if I had, there was a lot going on, because when you have DID, the different parts in your system, you can hear them talking. And I would hear parts talking in my head, but I just thought everyone did. I
Mhm.
thought that was normal. Like if you stood in your closet to pick out a shirt, that you might hear one part of yourself saying, I really want to wear that red shirt. And another person saying, no, 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 I don't want to wear that. I want to wear the blue shirt. And literally like hearing those voices speaking in my head, I just thought it was myself thinking. So, looking back, once I got my diagnosis, I could say, oh, yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. But at the time, I wasn't putting any of it together.
Appreciate that. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to pause here a moment and open my window. Hang on one second.
Okay.
just just it says
All right.
dissociative instead of
So,
dissociated.
Okay.
Dylan, how did you come into the picture here? How did this uh become known to you?
Yeah, so I had plenty of clues growing up that she had DID. In therapy growing up, I would literally say it's almost like she's switching on me, which is of course
Hmm.
the verb when she's switching from one part, one identity to another. So there were plenty of clues, but then once she got the diagnosis, she let me know that summer when I got home, and I just said that explains a lot because
Yeah.
it did
Hmm.
it made perfect sense. I'm like, okay, so you know yeah, she has trauma and it impacted her this way, and these identities are a coping mechanism, and she doesn't necessarily know that she's when she's in this fight or flight state or when another identity is out. And so
Yeah.
I mean, despite all the switching, I still see, there was definitely, she was just trying to survive and
Hmm.
be the best, most professional, amazing mom she could be. Simultaneously, working those 80-hour work weeks and, having all these different selves could be difficult to navigate because it's like, hey, am I talking to my work mom? Am I talking to like my empathetic mommy? Am I talking to, like somebody who's gonna boss someone around, who's still sort of in work mode or in protection mode. So it was just sort of difficult to navigate. But then the film came about because I needed a I needed a senior thesis film,
Hmm.
and I'm very much pro advocacy for mental health because I know that's not depicted well in media and it's not talked about enough. So I needed a senior thesis film, and I was like, hey, I want to make a film about DID and accurately portray it because there's not a single feature-length film or TV show out there that has accurately portrayed DID. So I set out, to work with mom here, Holly, um, and make that. And so far from the reception, I
You knocked
succeeded.
it out of the park. Yeah, I'd say you knocked it out of the park.
All right, we're gonna get there, but I
Okay.
appreciate you sharing that. Um, the, I want to back up here for a second
Hmm.
and kind of address how DID is portrayed and has been portrayed. There's a moment in the film where I think it's right after the encounter with the two people, and they're kind of out of the bedroom, and she explains to him like what it is. and it's like in one sentence that is so clear.
Yeah.
I was like, wow, this is like, but let's, h- how do you define, or how would you define DID, Holly? Let me ask you that.
Well, you start with you have to define dissociation first of all. And actually, I have on this great shirt. I've got some Dr. Jamie merch going on. Dissociation is not a dirty word. Okay. And dissociation itself just means, from the root word, means to sever. So to leave the present moment and go somewhere else. That's essentially what happens when you dissociate. And dissociation itself is a very common phenomenon. All of us dissociate at different times in our lives. If you're, from the simplest thing everyone can understand is highway hypnosis. You're driving down the road. Next thing you know, you are home and you have no idea what happened between, when you left and when you got there, because you dissociated. That's what happened. And there's a continuum of dissociation from what I just described all the way down to the far end of dissociative identity disorder. And with dissociative identity disorder, what I talked about earlier is when a small child is experiencing a very traumatic incident, the brain has this amazing ability to dissociate from that moment and basically get away from it, sever from that moment. And what happens with the dissociative identity disorder is an actual identity is formed to hold that memory. And that way, like I said, Holly was able to go to school the next day after she had been sexually abused by her grandfather and not have to think about that, because those memories were being held by another part of her brain, another identity. And that's what's so interesting about dissociative identity disorder is there are actual, I said earlier, I have 26 people living in my body. They really are like separate people, separate self states. They have separate genders and sexual orientations and preferences. I talked about the colors of the shirts earlier. Just like any other person, they're very separate and distinct. They like certain music. And so that's, dissociative identity disorder is a condition where the individual's brain has been separated into these different identities to hold different traumatic memories, so that all of that doesn't have to be held by one person, because it would be too overwhelming. And oftentimes, an element of the dissociative identity disorder is there's elements of amnesia, and that can look a lot of different ways. There's different types of amnesia. We could talk about that quite a bit. So, that's why, for example, the amnesia is what allows you to not know about it, right? I don't know about this thing that happened to me. And having these different parts, they're there, but you don't necessarily know they're there, even though they might be fronting and coming out and different ones are present. You're just, unaware that all of that's happening because that's how the condition works. So I don't know that that was a very succinct explanation. It's a very complex condition, but one that is a phenomenal coping mechanism that the brain has.
Appreciate that. So, Dylan, I want to go back when when you found out your mom was diagnosed with DID. You said, "Oh, it explained a lot," but beyond that, how did you respond? What was your response to that?
Our response was, thank God we finally know what's going on here.
Yeah.
Really, I was thrilled that we actually knew what was happening, because there was a lot of suicidality going on, and a lot of bizarre behavior, like we had to hide the knives in the house, not for our safety but for her safety, because there was one part who holds all this shame,
And anger.
and anger toward the self, because thinking when you're abused, as a child, it's like my parent or my guardian or whoever's in charge of me, they wouldn't do this to me. We look up to them. They're a good person, so I must have done something bad.
Right.
And so that's where a lot of this shame comes from. And so in figuring this out, it's like amazing. Now she can get help with the trauma and working with these parts, so that she's not wanting to kill herself or anything.
Yeah.
Now, when the topic of the film came up, Dylan, how did you approach your mom about that?
Well, I was fortunate that it was during the pandemic, so I was already home, and I'd been struggling with ideas to come up with about for a senior thesis topic because I didn't want to just make some, just some film about, anything. I want my films to matter. I wanted them
Now,
to have an
were you a filmmaker
I
prior to
still am a
this?
filmmaker. Yeah, I've
Right,
been a
but I mean,
filmmaker.
before this film, were you like a filmmaker?
Yeah, I've been making movies
Okay.
since I was 8 years old.
Oh, okay, okay,
Yeah.
And he was in film school at Chapman University, studying
okay.
film production at the
Got it.
time. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So I was at home and I was basically it was like, hey, this is an important topic. It's never been portrayed accurately, and I want people to know about this thing instead of associating you with, Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho
Mhm.
or, M. Night Shyamalan's Split,
Mhm.
these murderers.
Mhm.
Right.
And at first Holly was like, no, it was too personal.
Mhm.
It was too difficult of a topic, but
And I'd only been diagnosed for 2 years at that point, so it's still pretty fresh.
yeah, it was still pretty
Hmm.
fresh. But I don't know, we talked about it and
Mhm.
maybe she slept on it, or another identity came about, was like, hey, actually, I like this idea.
Yeah. No, I mean, when I heard what Dylan was, his vision for what he wanted to achieve, I said, yeah, that sounds like a good idea because it's really just so irresponsible what Hollywood has done in terms of the stigmatization and this portrayal of DID. And I knew that Dylan had the potential to make something that, could be an accurate depiction and that could hopefully one day be helpful to people.
So what was the goal of the film?
The goal was, hey, I got 15 minutes. How can I explain what DID actually is, what causes it, what it looks like, and how people go about living a normal life with it and recovering from not the DID, but from recovering from the trauma, because
Mhm.
that's what they're recovering from, because
Mhm.
it's a protective mechanism and a coping mechanism, and even though the guidelines try to make, go toward final fusion and integration, where you quote unquote remove the identities, most people don't really want that. It's the people who are, uh, so to speak, singletons are trying to help people cure DID.
Hmm.
Um, right now, I gotta use my words carefully, but it's sort of like it can be very destructive if somebody's just like, hey, only talk to the quote unquote host.
Mhm.
Don't let them dissociate.
Mhm.
You have to talk only with the adult
Mhm.
part.
Mhm.
You're very rigid in your response to
Mhm.
how to heal trauma, because that's really what's going on. It's you're healing trauma, and if a part who has trauma needs to talk about something, then by saying I'm not going to listen to you 4-year old who experienced this abuse, you're shutting them down.
Mhm.
Um,
Hmm.
so I wanted to show that there is hope, and the ending of the film, it shows her talking to her parts and thanking them. That's something that
Mhm.
Holly actually does every night before bed.
Mhm.
That's
Hmm.
her part of her routine,
Mhm.
just to show, yeah, this is how, working toward quote unquote functional multiplicity. Um, and yeah.
Let me just preface by saying I'm not an expert in DID at all.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
forgive me in advance if I stumble with my understanding
Okay.
and my questions. Um, Holly, after your diagnosis,
Mhm.
first of all, how did you find someone to understand what the heck was going on?
Yeah, this is a major problem, because unfortunately, therapists are not trained in school about dissociative identity disorder. I'm not a therapist, but I know a lot of them. And, most people will share with me that they get virtually no training about the condition in school, or they might get 30 minutes one day.
Right, right.
And so therapists, they're not trained. And then where do they get information if they're not trained? Oh, they might watch a movie or two where we're portrayed as very violent, criminal people, scary. So there's all of these misunderstandings about the condition, and then they're perpetuated within the clinical community, because there are these ideas like, oh, DID is rare. You'll never see it.
Hmm.
Okay. That is untrue. At least 1.5% of the population lives with DID. That's more than people that have schizophrenia. That's more than people that have bulimia. It's a higher percentage than either of those conditions, which most people know about, therapists know about, understand. But DID, it's like, oh, it's this big mystery. It's not, if people actually, take the time to learn, but they're not taught it in school. But for whatever reason, the misinformation just continues to be perpetuated within the clinical community. So it's rare. You'll never see it in your office. Oh, because what they're looking for is civil. They're looking for these dramatic switches. Well, I explained earlier, it's a covert condition. So no one's going to show up in your office with a different outfit every day as a different part. That's, that's not how it works. So the question is, how did I find someone? Well, most people take a good 8 to 10 years to find a person to diagnose them with DID. I've been in and out of the mental health system since my earliest, therapy was in college. And no one ever picked up on what I think, looking back, are some pretty good signs. Now, once I got, though, to that point of the Great Unraveling, where things were really out of control, they were out of control because the different parts of us that had stayed silent for so long finally wanted to talk about it. They wanted to be heard. They wanted to start expressing all these things, and they were ready to process those traumas that we had pushed down for so long. And so that's why things were happening. That's what explains the suicidality, and everything that was happening. And so at that time, we went to a psychiatrist because, well, we actually were on this search. We were going to a lot of different places. We went to see the neurologist because at first I thought, because I had had all this mold poisoning, I thought, okay, I just have, a problem with my brain and we need to go to the neurologist, which at the time my brain was so wacky. I was calling the neurologist the Zinderbologist. And I was speaking in all these babbly words all the time, which is because I was like, everything was short circuited. And I was having trouble speaking properly. Everything was just, it was really, that's why I call it the Great Unraveling. So when I went to see the first psychiatrist after we got through, into the neurologist, he's like, no, this is a psychiatric problem. We were seeing different people. And, the first psychiatrist had no idea. The second one really had no idea. And by the third one, in just like 4 months, luckily, I made my way into the office of a psychiatrist who had experience treating people with DID.
Where was this?
In North Carolina.
Okay.
Yeah.
The Raleigh Triangle research area was until recently like had the highest concentration of PhDs in the country.
I think we're second or third.
We're second or third now.
Yeah.
But
okay.
Yeah. Is Raleigh, Durham, Chapel Hill. So my psychiatrist is in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, just down the road. And she had experience treating people with DID. And so she's a psychiatrist, but she also does psychotherapy. And she has been my therapist ever since for the last 6 years. She diagnosed me in March of 2018. So she pretty quickly could see what was going on.
Let me ask you, what did she do that allowed her to see this, what was going on? Or what did she do? What did she ask? What did she not do, et cetera?
So first of all, she did a number of used a number of screening tools pretty early on around, trauma and dissociation. And, she could see from some of the things there that kind of confirmed what she was seeing as I was presenting, because I was presenting, in a way that was, like I said, the Great Unraveling. And so I would speak with different voices, tones of voices. Some might not realize those were different parts, but she could see that those were different parts just by the level of kind of the difference of how I would speak and talk about things. So, she was able to see that those were parts. And again, someone else might not see that they were parts because they were expecting the different part to be in a different outfit, because honestly, that's what the media portrays. So, she could see that, I was talking about my severe childhood trauma. Okay. So DID, I didn't say this earlier when I defined it for you, but it's generally happens with people who've had severe and recurring childhood trauma, generally before the age of 6. So I was talking about my childhood trauma. So that's, that's a clue. If you've got severe and recurring childhood trauma, that's, someone could have DID if they're presenting with the different things that I had going on. So, I'm not a therapist. I don't know if you asked her, what did you see at the beginning that really clued you in? She'd probably be able to answer that better than me.
Well, no, and that's fine, but I'm just curious about your own experience, because we have a lot of therapists and coaches who are listening to this, who will benefit from what you
Mhm.
have to say, and of
Yeah.
course what that therapist might have to say. So Dylan, back to you. One of the questions I had was, okay, you want to make a film about DID, but that doesn't necessarily mean you had to make a film about your mother or your mother's experience, right? Why was that important?
Well, I mean, if this is a very misunderstood topic, and I have a great resource right here.
Because we co-wrote the
Yeah,
screenplay
we
together.
we co-wrote the script together, and again, if like it wouldn't make any sense for me just to go reading about something that
Mhm.
somebody else has and then go try to make up my own assumptions of what it is when
Mhm.
I could make, there's a great quote. I don't know who's said it or if it's just, a general quote for people with DID, but like our stories have been told by those who have not lived them.
Well, Melissa
Mhm.
Parker said that,
Was Melissa
and
Parker.
in as a quote in Jamie Marich's Dissociation Made Simple book, which for therapists listening, if you want a really good resource, I love that book,
Yeah.
Dissociation Made Simple by Jamie Marich. It's really good at laying it out there because it's she interviewed a number of people, quite a number of people who have DID and pulled together all of their experiences to use to explain it. And so it's written from the voices of the people who live it. And people's experiences with DID can vary quite a bit. Every system is different and unique in how we experience it. So I think that's what's powerful about that book is it has the perspectives of quite a few different people who have the condition.
Just as an aside, how did you get in touch or meet Jamie? Because I
We
think
met
that's how we got in touch,
It is,
right?
yes.
Yeah.
Yes, yes. So Dr. Jamie Marich, we met originally at an Infinite Minds Healing Together conference. And we met them I can't remember if it was 2019 or 2020 is the first time we went to the conference and we met them there. And we started following them and their work. And then in 2020 or maybe 2021 at the conference. Yeah, it was 2021 at the conference. I told Jamie that my son was making this film because we started writing in 2020, but you shot it in 2022. In 2021, I told her that, my son was working on this film. And I had actually gone to another screening that she had hosted online of another mental health film. And so I said, hey, when this comes together, might you consider hosting a screening? And she was delighted to. She thought, oh, that sounds wonderful. So that's kind of how we got to know Jamie Marich. And for anyone who is not familiar, the Healing Together conference is an amazing experience. By the time this airs, it's probably going to be too late because it's February 16th to 18th of 2024. But it'll be around next year. It's been going on for many years. It was founded by Jamie Pollock, and it's a conference where people who have DID, their supporters, and clinicians who treat people with DID all come together.
Mm,
It's in Orlando this year, which it has been for a number of years. And it's also a hybrid conference. And there's probably 400 or so people in Orlando, plus people from, I don't know, last year I think they had 16 different countries. So it's an amazing educational opportunity and community building opportunity for people who
right.
have DID.
Awesome. Awesome. So Dylan, the success of the film, congratulations. I mean, how
Thank
how did you when you finished it, what did you do with it? What was how did you want to get it out there?
you. I kind of, in the back of my head, knew that Holly was going to send it to, to people like Jamie Marich and other clinicians that she was tight with already, or close with. Um, and and so, yeah, I just sort of, I'm like, she'll do something with it. But otherwise, we went on a brief film festival run. But due to how, misunderstood it already is, people, looking at film festivals and don't necessarily know what to look for.
Mhm.
They'll just be like, oh, that's interesting. Okay. Um, so my primary thing was not, to go get a bunch of film festival awards because I'm like, this is pretty much understood already. But I got in a few festivals and it was great for my experience as a filmmaker. But overall, it was getting into the Healing Together conference and presenting the film there that really sort of shot it around the world.
It did. Mhm.
That's
But the first
awesome.
time I saw it, I mean, when I watched the film, Dylan and I wrote the screenplay together, but I wasn't involved at all in the filming. So, he brought it to life on the screen. And when I saw it for the first time, I was completely blown away. I was like, this exceeds my wildest imagination and expectations of what this could be to be able to depict the condition. And so when I saw it, I was like, Dylan, we have to do something with this movie. It has to be seen because it's going to be very impactful for people who have DID to see themselves reflected back. They've never seen it completely in a way that is so validating. And that's the number one comment we get from people who see the film. I have never felt so seen and validated watching
Wow.
this film.
Wow. So as we kind of wind down here, Holly, and I understand uh, treatment is different for different systems. What is your treatment like?
So my treatment has been a variety of therapeutic modalities. I would say the probably most important one that has been impactful for me has been EMDR. We've done a ton of EMDR to, each of the different parts have their trauma, and they each had to go through a process of working through those traumas. And EMDR was critical. So was art therapy. We did a tremendous amount of art therapy at home, collage. We'd tell our stories through collage. We did a lot of play therapy. We spent a lot of time because the different parts, a lot of them are children parts, they're young, and they would sit on the floor with their stuffed animals and they would talk about things and, act out the story of what happened and retell the story and talk about what happened in therapy, lots of play therapy, lots of time in nature, walking and talking out loud, letting the parts talk out loud and process what had happened. So a lot of different modalities, and also talk therapy with our therapist as well. So it's been a really healthy process for us in terms of just the different modalities. And now we've gotten to a point where I would say things are fairly stable. We still are in therapy. We still have things that might trigger different parts and things that come up. But overall, I would say we're living with what I would call functional multiplicity. And that is what I think is the goal of many, many people who have DID, is to be able to live in a functional way with all of the different parts in the system.
And finally, for you, Holly, what do you want? What do you feel it's important for therapists out there to know?
I think it's important for therapists to know that there's nothing to be afraid of in working with people who have DID. The movies would lead you to believe otherwise. They would lead you to believe that we're violent, that we're difficult. But we are hurting. We are people who have been abused as children, and we're not to be feared. Be curious. Don't be afraid. Seek out information about the condition. There's a lot of really good trainings that are out there. Take the time to get to know the condition, because you were seeing it in your office all the time, and you might be missing it. Because again, it's at least 1.5%. That's with DID. I'm not even talking about OSDD and other dissociative disorders. So there's a large percentage of people that are coming into your practice that have these conditions. And I would just, really ask that you take the time to get educated on them. And watch our film. It's a good start.
Yeah, well, I'll certainly have that linked up here.
Yeah.
Dylan, how about for you? What's next for you?
Right now I'm working on a longer version of the film, as well as a documentary on how DID has been misrepresented/represented. It's only been misrepresented. So if I talk about how it's been represented, it's all misrepresentation. In film and television. So I've watched like 60 movies so far about DID, and all of them are unfortunately I end it being like, well, I'm glad we're finally at the credits. But the only other thing I would say is, as far as the EMDR comment, just since there are therapists listening to this, EMDR with DID, just know, I'm of course not trained in EMDR, but from the therapists I've talked to, doing regular standard EMDR with DID is not necessarily recommended. Just don't jump straight into the trauma immediately. I would say if you are wanting to learn more, try to take some training about EMDR and DID, because just jumping straight into that deep trauma memory instead of saying working from the top down into it can be dysregulating from my interviews. I just wanted to share that since she said EMDR. It is incredibly helpful and important, but I just wanted to share that EMDR with DID does need a little modification.
Okay, awesome. Appreciate you saying that. So we'll have The movie linked up here at the show notes page at the
Great.
traumatherapistpodcast.com. In addition to that, what's the best way for people to learn about what you're doing
So
and
you
or to get
can,
in contact with you?
yeah, so you can go to our website, Dylan's website,
Okay.
DylanCrumpler.com.
and that's in the show notes as well.
Okay.
You can follow us on social media. We have both Instagram and Facebook accounts, and those are in the show notes as well. But Petals of a Rose _ the movie for both Instagram and Facebook is where you can follow what we're doing and see what's happening with the longer film, with the documentary. Do you want to comment on writing in?
Yeah, so we're adding a submissions page. It should be on the website by the time this airs. We're basically any clinician who has, has an experience working with DID and clients of DID. If they want to share their stories about how the media has misrepresented DID and how that has negatively harmed their practice, and being able to treat DID, we would love to hear it. Because so far from the 60 movies I've watched, I can't find a single accurate representation, and they're all are portrayed as violent in some way.
Right.
And it's like, guys, please stop it. This is the ultimate victim blaming right here.
And for people who are listening that may have DID, we'd love to hear your stories of how you've been impacted by the misrepresentation, and also your ideas for what you'd want to see in the longer version of Petals of a Rose that we're making. And I know this is primarily therapists that are listening, but there's a lot of therapists who have DID. They're just not necessarily comfortable sharing that publicly because, unfortunately, there's even more stigma within the clinician community, which hopefully that's going to change over time, as there's quite a few clinicians who are trying to, be vocal. Jamie Marich is one of them, about talking about the importance of lived experience for clinicians. And I support that completely. So I would hope that more and more clinicians would be able to come out and with their experience and normalize it, because there's nothing to be ashamed about having DID, and you can be a completely functional, I was a tax partner at Deloitte. I was living with DID my whole life, and you can be a very functional therapist with DID as well. And that's not something that people should have to hide.
Yeah. Well, beautifully said. I appreciate you both being here. Super inspiring. You're welcome back anytime. Love to keep up to date on the next movies and so forth. So whenever you want to come back, you're welcome. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you,
so much,
guys.
Guy.
All right. Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.